Hey everyone, you are listening to the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. Today is a guest edition of the podcast, and with me I have Brandon Bruce, who is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder at Cirrus Insight. If you're not familiar with Cirrus Insight, they are a Gmail Salesforce productivity company. They have an all-in-one sales productivity platform that has integration with Salesforce and Gmail. On top of that, over the years, they've also have a couple of other sister products called attach.io and assistant.to. And in the conversation today with Brandon, we covered a lot of the early days of he and Ryan, his co-founder, as they were building out their company, Cirrus Insight. And now today, almost 7 years later, after founding the company, they are now have been a 3-time winner. They've been on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies the last 3 years. So they've been growing super, super fast. And one of the things that I think is a little bit unusual about their company is that they are based in Knoxville, Tennessee, and also in Irvine, California. So they are a split office and have a huge presence in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is not typically a city that you think of when you think of technology companies. And so in my conversation today with Brandon, we dove into lots of the early days of their company as they were launching their first product, talking about things like how did they get their first users? How did they convert those first users into their first paying customers at a really short period of time? They did that in about 3 or 4 months. You'll hear about the details of that in just a little bit. We talked about how they priced their product out of the gate and how they moved the pricing from their initial price point up to where it is today, and then eventually having a whole suite of products and a whole range of different price points. We talked a bit about the details of when they made their first sales hires and built out their sales team, and the work that they do on a day-to-day basis in terms of generating new product ideas, talking with customers, and making sure that everything that they're building is in fact world-class and stays on top of their market segment. So really, really insightful conversation with Brandon. We started off the conversation talking a little bit on the personal side. Brandon is a long-distance ultra endurance athlete. So he and I have a little bit of that in common. In years past, many years ago, he did a race called the Furnace Creek 508, which is a 508-mile bike race through Death Valley. So I asked him a little bit about that just out of personal curiosity. We talked a bit about that and then jumped into a lot of the discussion around how they started and built and have grown Cirrus Insight. So I think you're really going to like the conversation because of the level of detail that we got into in those early days. And also Brandon's just a really nice guy, and he's super, super smart about and thoughtful about how they've gone about growing their company over the last 7 years. So I think that's it for now. Let's head over to the conversation that I had with Brandon Bruce. Hey, is that Brandon?
Hey, it's Brandon.
Brandon, how are you? Scott here.
Good, good. How are you, Scott?
Good, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm really glad we can make this work.
Absolutely. Likewise. Where are you?
I'm in Davis, California.
No kidding. Where there's more bicycles than students.
Well, you would know a bit about bicycling.
That's true. That's great. Great territory up there. And the best winemaking program in the world.
Yeah, my wife is a PhD over at UC Davis, and she's an economist and focuses on wine grapes.
There you go. There you go.
People's like, well, that's the place to do it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be the best program in the world for that. I mean, anytime we live in Tennessee now, and so anytime we go to a winery kind of in the southeast, right, it's like, well, is this going to be good or not? But if we see, a Davis diploma on the wall, it's like, oh, this is going to be good.
Oh, it's actually, yeah, it could be good.
We got the right person here.
Yeah, I wanted to, before we really dive in, I wanted to ask you 2 questions, 2 kind of background questions. One is, what's the California town of 800 people you grew up in?
Los Olivos, California. So there's a bunch of great wineries there too.
And where exactly is that?
Central Coast, so Santa Barbara County, about half an hour north of the city of Santa Barbara.
Got it.
And you got Sanford Winery, Firestone Winery, and about 100 others now.
Okay.
You guys watch the movie Sideways?
Yeah.
That's where it was shot.
Got it. Okay, cool. And then the second question I was going to ask you about cycling, because you did the Furnace Creek 508.
Yeah.
Did you still doing a lot of cycling, or?
I'm getting back into it.
Okay.
It's fair to say I started to do progressively less when we simultaneously started the company and then had 2 kids. which are both awesome adventures in their own right, obviously. But the concept of like, going for a ride with my buddies from 4 to 8 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening, was not going to happen anymore. So I kind of scaled that back. I still ride primarily like super early in the morning. And then I'm ramping up again to do a ride in October. We're going to go from Knoxville down to Florida for an Alzheimer's fundraiser. So it'll be like a 10, 11 day ride, 1,100 miles. So that'll get the let out.
Nice. Yeah, that's the reason that my son was primarily the reason why I quit doing triathlons. And now I just do ultra running because it's just much easier to train for one sport than 3. And the long ride on Saturdays, get up at 5 a.m, out till noon, come back. And like, oh, by the way, now I have to do a transition run. I'll be back in 45 minutes.
Right.
I'm home, but I'm not home.
Right. I'm home, but you just look the other way. Right.
I'm kind of home. I'm going to be in the neighborhood. It's just got to be too much. My wife's super, super supportive of everything, but just for me, I just can't handle being out.
Yeah, no, it's a decision on our part, largely just sort of like, well, I don't want to miss all that time, And what ultras are you doing? Do you do them primarily in California?
I've done them all over the place. I did mostly California. I did a 200-mile race last year up and around Tahoe.
Oh, awesome.
I did a Zion 100 down at near the Zion National Park this year. I did a 50-miler up in Mount Hood this summer. And then this weekend was back up in Tahoe for a 100K that I unfortunately DNF'd on, but turns out was one of my best races ever because I chose to DNF.
Nice.
That's like a whole nother, I can unpack that for hours. I made a lot of really good decisions along the way that led me to DNFing, that if I would have not made those decisions, I could have been in really bad trouble.
Right. So, yeah, that's the risk of putting yourself out there for a long time. So was the 200 just single stage, like 100? You just kept going, or was it like broken up over into stages or something? Or how
it's not officially a stage race, but the way I planned out the race, I treated it like a stage race. So I'd run for 17 hours or so and then sleep for a couple hours and then wake up, eat, run for 17 hours, sleep for a couple hours. So it took me 82 hours to finish, which was
amazing.
Top, I'm not super fast. I'm like top 20% of people. So faster than most, but still way slower than the people at the front of the pack. And
well, there's always folks that are focusing on it, right? Like, I mean, they basically do it either professionally or it's what they do.
Yeah, or they're just like biologically.
Yeah, and they talk about that too, right? I mean, there's got to be the LeBron Jameses of fill in the blank.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a special biological combination that obviously hard work goes a long way too, but they're aided by the fact that they can jump higher, have bigger hands or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, speaking of hard work, I'm excited to talk to you about Cirrus Insights and the work that you guys have done, because if you don't mind, we just kind of transition into that, because I was really excited to have you on the podcast, and especially on the heels of third year in a row being on Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies. And so huge congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks. That was one of those things when we obviously knew that we were applying the first year that we applied, but we had no expectation of even making the list. I mean, we really didn't know anything about it. So we kind of submitted our information. And then when we got an email saying, hey, you're on the list, we were like, oh, that's awesome. And then we clicked through and I was like, number 41, how'd that happen? So it was just one of those great, shot in the arms for the collective team. So I was like, hey, everybody, we're number 41. They were super excited just because of the number, that we were on the list, and because the number was so extraordinary. So yeah, obviously it was a great testament to the hard work of the team and the great product development the engineers on our side had done and our ability to go to market and sell it. But it was also one of those things, as I recommended to other entrepreneurs, if you feel that you want to apply for Inc. 500, definitely apply the first year that you're eligible, which is after a few years being in business, because it is mathematical, right? It's based on growth rate. So you want to do it based on, your first year in business, where you have typically, for most of us, very low sales. And then, 3-4 years later, if you've ramped up, then the growth rate can be pretty staggering. So we were able to get 41 in 2016. Then last year, we were number 546, which we're really happy about too. And then this year, we still managed to get on the list, which is awesome, at 1,775. So certainly the growth rate has slowed by comparison, but that's because we have real revenue now. So to incrementally increase that each year is kind of a feat in and of itself.
Well, and I really want to unpack that a lot because there's a lot of elements to how you've gotten there that are in a lot of ways counterintuitive to the typical, software startup. I mean, especially out here in Northern California, and people think about Silicon Valley, and a lot of the people that listen to the show are company founders and entrepreneurs. And the fact that one, that you're able to do that, you've only been a company for 6 years, started by two guys, borrowed $50,000 and sold your first product before you built it. To go from that to 6 years later being on the Inc. 5000 3 times, doing it from Knoxville, Tennessee, and doing it without venture funding. That's something that most people would not expect.
It's not necessarily today the traditional software story. Although I will say, and we're always pleased to find this out, whenever we're talking with our customers, and we've got a really broad base of customers, almost 5,000 different organizations use Cirrus Insight. It's really across the board. But of course, the vast majority of them are built from the ground up. Most companies here in the United States and around the world are built, just with very low capital and a bunch of hard work. And then they get to the point where they are. So that's sort of in comparison, in juxtaposition with the trend in software, which has been raise a lot of institutional money early, scale early, and then, go to market and go. And there's tremendous advantages. It wasn't the model that was available to us, right? We're first-time founders. Ryan had a great idea. We thought we could take it to market. My job was to basically make a lot of phone calls, show up at a lot of events, talk with a lot of people. I told my kids when they were really young, and I still tell them today, what do you do for a living, Dad? And basically, I talk for a living. I try to talk with people, and more importantly, listen for a living, right? If our customers tell us something and we can key in on a trend, then those features that we've built in response to customer feedback have far and away been better by orders of magnitude than the features that we've kind of cooked up in the lab, right? Like, I've got a secret idea for a cool thing that might benefit somebody someday, versus a customer saying, I've got a present need in my business. We need to solve this. So the lack of, big institutional funding early in the life of the company and even today has in many ways been a blessing because it causes us to focus. We can't follow too many shiny objects. We followed some, and some have worked out and some haven't, but we're really forced to say, shoot, we just don't have the resources to go down that rabbit hole. We're going to have to focus on our core competency, go back, listen to our customers, talk with them more, and build what they're asking us to build, and rely on the fact that most of the time they're right. There are, of course, and listeners will be quick to point out, sometimes customers are wrong. That happens. We've been asked to build some stuff, including by like huge percentage of our customer base. Well, we better build that. And we've built it. And it turned out that no one actually used that feature. That's always kind of surprising. At the same time, some of those features are really important from a marketing standpoint. In other words, they're important to have, even though nobody uses them, which sounds kind of weird, but people think that they're going to use them.
Yeah.
So they'll use 99 features, but they think they'll use that 100th feature. It's just important to have it in the bullet point list, but it's not something people actually use.
Yeah. So let's talk about where you are now and where you started. So right now, I know that, I've done a bit of an intro and before you and I hopped onto the call here. When somebody asks you, like, what is Cirrus Insights? Like, what do you do? What is your description of the company today? And then secondly, I'd love to hear, what did you think it was when you first started, when it was you and your co-founder?
Yeah, interestingly, it's very similar today as what it was when we launched, which is it's a plugin for Gmail and now also for Outlook that connects to Salesforce. So for companies, and especially for sales teams, but increasingly also support teams and success teams, they use Salesforce as their customer relationship management platform. We plug into Gmail and to Outlook so that they can sync their emails, sync their appointments, and make updates to Salesforce without ever leaving their inbox. So we're basically providing a single screen where a salesperson can do everything they want, from add a prospect into the top of the funnel, to send a proposal and track and see whether the recipient opens it, to schedule the demo, to close one and get the deal signed, and all of that data gets piped into Salesforce. So the feedback that we've gotten over the years across probably 4,000+ reviews is from end users, this saves me time, right? I'm in sales, I'm strapped for time. This is saving me time. I don't have to jump between two screens anymore. And management is asking me to make updates to Salesforce. I just don't have time to do it. I'd much rather talk with customers and close deals. And so Cirrus Insight helps me do that. On the management side, the feedback is usually, hey, thank goodness, we sure invested a lot in the Salesforce platform. We felt like we rolled it out well, but no one would use it. And so now that we've put it in the inbox where they can see it all day and it's useful to them, the sales team is really starting to update records in Salesforce, and we can now run meaningful reports and get some intelligence on how we operate as a sales machine. So yeah, that was how we launched 6-7 years ago. That's still the bread and butter. The main thing that has changed in the evolution of kind of this new industry, if you will, of sales enablement is that we've added a lot of features and functionality to the platform. So what started with an application that simply enabled you to save an email into Salesforce, create a new lead, create a contact, those are some of our initial features, has now kind of blossomed into something where you can search for new prospects, you can share your calendar availability and share out your calendars, make it really easy for people to book meetings with you. Mm-hmm. You can send out attachments via links instead of bulky file attachments, and then actually watch in real time as people interact with your slide decks and stuff. So long story short is it's a much broader, full-featured kind of sales enablement platform that sits between your two major cloud platforms. So that's either G Suite or Microsoft Office 365 on the one hand, and Salesforce on the other hand. So these massive cloud platforms, and we're the small middleware integration application, cloud application that sits in the middle and adds value to both sides.
Yeah, so that idea of the CRM is always supposed to be the system of record, but if it requires a salesperson typing in notes or manually entering that stuff, then it just doesn't get done. I was looking at one of your cartoons that you published in the Cartoons for Salespeople book, and it was like, what's the difference pre-CRM versus post-CRM? Like pre-CRM, I have my spreadsheet and I fill all that out. Now with the CRM, I fill out my spreadsheet and then I copy and paste it into the CRM.
Right.
So it's doubling my work.
And that's a great way to tell, in a lot of ways, the history of Cirrus Insight, which is early on. I mean, we saw some workflows that kind of, blew our hair back in terms of people were print screening emails into images and then uploading images as attachments into Salesforce, or they were blind copying themselves on emails that they had already sent out in order to save that email into Salesforce, right? Where it's just like, this doesn't make sense. This is, it was obvious to them and it was obvious to us, like, this is a waste of time. It's just busy work. And so how could we step in and just eliminate that altogether so that they can focus, doing what they enjoy, which is talking with people, selling, getting out, getting to know the customer. We've had more than one salesperson come to us and say, look, the manager sort of asked me to update Salesforce, but I pushed back and I said, I can either go sell or I can update the database. Which would you prefer? Of course, the smart manager is like, go sell. But then the breakdown is you never really learn about what is the sales team doing, who's doing the best, what's working, what's not. And so it's hard to scale that way. So we hopefully provide some of the oil so that the machine doesn't break down after a while.
And so when you launched the first product and you got the first customer, I want to kind of think about your growth from where you started to where you are today, because I think this is the sort of phases of growth I think are really important to people listening. Talk a little bit about that first customer. What is it that you sold? And what was it about what you were offering to them made that customer say, I don't even care if it's you and Ryan hacking this stuff together. Like, I have such a pain with this problem. I'm willing to trust you guys to fix this for us.
That was one of the great things, and one of the most fun periods of growing the company was that first phase where, Ryan, my co-founder, had this idea and had built out the app. And my job was really to try to recruit as many people into the pilot or the beta, if you will, to provide feedback. And what was fun about it is we were all in it together, right? To your point, they knew that, hey, here's some folks that are hacking this together. They're trying things. And they, on their side, recognize that. So if stuff broke down, if there was a bug, they just flag it and be like, hey, I found something. You guys might want to fix this. And by the way, if you can add these 3 or 4 features, that would be awesome. So it was the feedback of those first kind of 1,000 beta users that we cobbled together through a one-page website with just a little email form and kind of showing up and carpetbagging Dreamforce many years ago with just a little postcard that said, do you use Gmail with Salesforce? You might try this app. It takes 2 clicks to install it. So thankfully enough people took us up on that. And then that group was, very evangelistic, if you will. I mean, they just provided a ton of feedback and would tell their friends about it and tell their employer and get more people in their company to try it. And so it was all that feedback that created our first, 6 to 9 months of roadmap for the app. The key was, though, that we had enough of those early users say, look, this is solving a significant problem. This is saving me a lot of time. And I spent a lot of time and money to roll out Salesforce and configure it. And this is making it actually worthwhile. So I would pay for this. And the thing that really convinced us, because we were still trying to decide, do we launch this thing or do we really go in the tank and develop it from an engineering standpoint for another 6 to 9 months before we launch? And that sounded really attractive, because then we thought, well, then we'll release it and it'll be really polished and beautiful, and we'll stand behind it, super proud at what we've built. And right now we're proud of what we built, but it's still pretty early. But we had several customers, and I'm especially thinking of one who I pushed the first version of, what we'll call our commercial website that had more than one page. And I thought that it was not going to be indexed by Google, but obviously I didn't do that properly. So Google indexed it. One of our early users found it, and they put an order through. And we weren't planning to charge people yet, but they came in and paid, and we got a text message because Ryan had wired it up that way that said, hey, money just got deposited in the bank in the merchant account. And we were like, whoa, where'd that come from, right? So I'm tracing it back. Beta user and tried a ton of feedback. You can keep using the app for several more months before we start charging for it. And they just said, hey, it's adding so much value, I'm going to buy it anyway when you release it for sale. So I'll go ahead and be your first customer. It was that feedback that pushed us over the edge to launching the app when we did, which was in December of 2011. And that made a huge difference because we got to market early. I think our next competitor launched, within a couple months after that, but enabled us to sign our first, 500 customers, start that initial kind of cash flow flywheel, and enable us several months later to make our first hires. And so it really just launched the company. And that was the benefit of having all those people that were in the weeds with us that were saying, hey, we just really want to see you guys develop this. Thanks for doing it. And it made for a really great community. And it's nice that a lot of those users, 6-7 years later today, are still with us, and they'll email me back. Sometimes they'll reply to a thread that's like from 2012, right? And they'll send me a new message like, hey, saw the new feature. That's cool. Or I'll see you at Dreamforce this year. So good memories of that time, because it was those folks that kind of pushed us to get it out to market.
So I want to ask some really specific questions on that, because I know you might hear that story. I'm like, okay, well, that sounds great. That's like a Yammer kind of story where you just get a bunch of people to use it and eventually they'll want to buy it. So my specific questions are, who were the target users that started to download and use the app? And then secondly, that the story that you shared was like, I'm saving time for this. I would pay money for this. How did you get from, okay, this is useful, to actually getting people to spend money on something that saves time? Because that sometimes is hard to quantify. Who were those target users that got you all that feedback? And were those the actual people that were taking out the credit cards and buying, or did they have to go to a sales manager, or did they have to go to a VP of sales to get approval?
Yeah, it was a combination of both. So some of these folks were folks that we had seen posting on boards online, basically saying, I have a problem. And so we responded on those boards and said, we're working on it. We're trying to solve it for you. Are you willing to help us solve it? Will you jump in with us and help us? We can solve this together. And so they came in. So we knew they had a need and that they were a customer of Salesforce, and they used Google, and so they were a target. The other kind of category or categories of people that I specifically tried to target were, one, Salesforce consulting partners. So folks that really, really knew the platform well, and they themselves had essentially a portfolio of customers. So I'd go to them and say, you guys are experts in the platform, and you kind of can speak on behalf of lots of customers that you're seeing every day, you're doing custom work for. Can you try the application, provide us feedback, and to the extent you're willing, share it with some of your customers and they can test it also. So those are the folks that kind of, to borrow some of the marketing language from Seth Godin and others, right? Those were kind of the sneezers, folks that you could share an idea with, and then they would, spread it virally to their user bases. So, those folks were extremely helpful and have been partners for many, many years. And then beyond that, there was that one-page website, and it's hard to overestimate the value of just simply raising your hand and saying, we're trying to do something over here. And even though it was, if we look back at it now, I don't know if we could find it on Wayback Machine or something, but, very, very basic, one pager. Hey, we're doing something between Salesforce and Gmail. Put in your email if you want us to send you an invite, and we'll let you download the test extension. And, a lot of people came to that site, as it turns out, and just said, yeah, I want to try it. And so then became the process of discovery, where I would try to email them back or call them and say, well, who are you and why do you come to the website? What did you search for, or who told you about this that made you want to try this thing? So those are kind of our three main buckets. And thankfully, we ended up getting, orders once we did officially launch from kind of each category. And then from the partner standpoint, those became folks that sent us, repeat business over a long time. I think it's fair to say a lot of our early customers sent us repeat business as well, because many people now transition jobs every couple of years. So we've had customers take us from one company to a second, to a third, to a fourth over the last 7 years, which has been really cool.
And were those users specifically, were those salespeople? Were they sales managers that the Salesforce consultants were working with? And then were those the people that whipped out the credit card and paid for the initial app, or was it higher up in the food chain?
It was a combination of both. So since the very beginning and still today, we sell Cirrus Insight bottom up and top down. So often it's a salesperson that's just, hey, how do I wring more sales out of my 24 hours in a day? How can I be more efficient, more effective? Mm-hmm. I'm going to go look for tools that can help me do it. They find it. Maybe they just use it. And then all of a sudden everyone's realizing, hey, they're doing better than everybody else, or they seem to have, found something. Let's go figure it out. Or they start using it and they tap everybody on the shoulder and be like, check this out. You guys need this too. And so it kind of spreads within the sales team, and then you take it to a manager. Hey, can I expense this? Can company pay for it? Can we do it site-wide? And so it goes bottom up. And then the flip side is also true. Cirrus Insight's often been kind of included in a larger change management conversation, if you will. So, hey, we're leaving our legacy CRM and we're going to the cloud. We're leaving our legacy email platform. We're going to the cloud. If we're trying to improve things overall from a technology perspective, what other software should we be looking at to kind of complete the whole picture and make all these various disparate apps work together? And that's where we come in, because we help stitch those apps together and make them functional. So there, it's a sales manager, director of sales, VP sales, or oftentimes on the technical side, director of IT, Salesforce administrator, coming in and saying, okay, cool, we built out the platform, we got it just the way we want, but we in fact actually want people to use it. And so how do we make it user friendly? And our answer to that is, sure, you're going to have problems getting people to use a new platform with a new web interface, but does anyone in your organization have trouble checking email? And the rhetorical answer is no, right? I mean, if you have an employee that's having trouble checking email, you got a bigger problem. Sure. That we may not be able to solve. But assuming they're checking email and spending time in their inbox with customers, then we're going to put Salesforce right there where they're going to see it every day, all day, and add value, the moment they install it. And so it's a pretty easy solution to kind of this big adoption quandary of like, how do we change everybody's workflow to go and update the CRM? It's like, well, let's just make it easy for them to update the CRM and kind of incentivize it through ease of use.
Got it. Hey everyone, Scott here. Little quick break from the conversation with Brandon. And what I want to do is just make a quick offer to you, the listening audience. If you're listening to this podcast and you're a startup founder and you're looking for a little bit of help, or you just want to get another set of eyes on the work that you're doing, especially on the sales side of your enterprise B2B startup, I'm here to help. My team is here to help. One of the things that we like to do is what we call a scale session. And a scale session is a way for us to learn a little bit about your sales process and then identify a couple of key gaps and opportunities in your sales process. We've also called this a sales audit. Scale session is a little bit more positive. If you want to think more positively, sales audit, maybe a little bit more on the negative side. Whichever the case, our job is to help you figure out where you can do some calibration and where you can do some improvement across your sales process so that you can start up, ramp up, and scale up your company. So if you're interested in having another set of eyes, talking through what you're doing right now and get some ideas for how you might improve, happy to brainstorm that with you. Easiest way to do that is just go over to Sales Qualia, that's Sales Qualia, QUALIA.com/scale session, SCALE session, salesqualia.com/scale session. Go ahead and answer a couple quick questions just to give us a baseline of where you are and where you need to go over the next year or so with your company. And then we can book in a time and help you figure out exactly what you need to do next to help you reach the outcome that you want to reach with your company. So that's it for now. Let's head back to the conversation with Brandon Bruce. And those early users, it's in a sense almost a self-selecting bias, because if I'm a top sales rep, like you said, I'm going to be looking for ways to calibrate my day. If I could find a way to save myself 2 hours because I don't have to copy paste or type notes in, then that person is just going to be intuitively the people looking for, is there a Gmail Salesforce solution? And then that's when they find you. And because
Exactly.
they tend to be the leaders in the sales team and the top performers, then it's not any salesperson of, there's a 30-person team. It's not the people at the bottom of the barrel that are saying, hey, I need more productivity apps. It's the top performer that's saying, I found this, I'm using this, it's working really great. It's making me do my job even better. So that has 100 times more credibility to the sales manager than because it's coming from a top performer.
Yeah, and that's an important point. And this is true, I think, for a lot of startups. It certainly benefited us, is that we didn't spend a lot of time early on having to convince people like, hey, this is going to really help you. trust us, try it. These were people that were, as you say, they were looking for the better mousetrap already. So all we had to show them was like, hey, cool, watch this video of the mouse, see how it got caught faster, it's better. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. Like, I want to try it. And then the software had to stand on its own. Like, once they installed it and got to use it, wouldn't matter what we had said. I mean, it literally had to work for them and be intuitive. And so once it did, then they were pretty fast. Like, hey, your brand promise was this was going to help me and it would save me time, and it does. And therefore, I'm ready to buy. Obviously, later, as we started to do more in the way of outreach, right, outbound, spread the word further, then some organizations is kind of, well, wait a second, who are you? What is the value proposition? Where's the pitch? And so then we had to have, develop all that collateral and kind of the talking points to go out and say, well, you'll see from our first 1,000 customers, these are the results that they got. These are the case studies. Therefore, we think this is transitive. We think you'll experience, by analogy, the same sort of results. But our early customers were all, folks out in the wilderness looking for something better. And once they saw it, they knew what it was when they found it. And they were relatively quick to purchase.
And what was the purchase price? Like, did you have a single user price and then a enterprise solution, multiple seats, or how did you think about crossing that penny gap?
So when we launched, we did a promotion. We said, if you want to be one of our first 500 customers, then you can purchase Cirrus Insight for $5 a month, paid annually, so $60 a year. And I don't know if this was a good decision or not, but we said, and if you buy now, then you can lock in that price for life, right? So you just pay $60 a year going forward. We're not going to increase the price on you. We may add new levels of the app. We may add other versions, et cetera. But, for all this core functionality, you're going to get it plus all the other stuff we add to that version of the app going forward at the same cost. And so that way we were able to book our first 500 customers. Once we booked those and we had told everybody up front, hey, this $5 a month is going to last until we get that number of customers, then it's going to be a $9 a month paid annually going forward. You could also buy monthly, but by providing I think it was usually a 20 to 30% discount on an annual basis, the vast majority of customers signed up annually. That was really helpful to us as a bootstrapped and then lightly funded startup once we had a couple angels come on board to book the cash early. That way we could put it to work and hire people and buy software that was useful to us in scaling up the company. So still today, the vast majority of our customers pay annually because we incentivize that, and also because they're typically paying Google and Microsoft and Salesforce on an annual basis. So that's just sort of par for the course in the industry. Then we were at $9 for the first 2 years. And then when we looked at the landscape of other applications on the market, whether they were competitive and in our space or just in a corollary space, and we looked at the number of features and the additional functionality we had added to the app, we're like, there's a lot more value here now. And so we changed the price at that point from $9 to $19. So we more than doubled the price. All the existing customers were good to go at their previous price. We didn't jack the price on anybody. We let them, hey, congratulations, you made a great decision. You locked in this great price. But for new customers signing up, they came in at 19. And we did a bunch of research for that. We even worked with an outsourced firm. So like, hey, let's analyze pricing. Let's look at the market drivers, et cetera. And I think that exercise was useful. At the same time, when it came down to pulling the trigger we just had to make the decision. It wasn't necessarily obvious as a result of the data what we should do, but we felt like it was the right thing. And thankfully, 2020 hindsight, when we did do that, our conversion rate stayed the same. And so, mathematically, that means we more than doubled revenue on new customers going forward, which was really, really helpful and important to us to be able to reach some of our goals in terms of, being able to serve increasingly large enterprise customers, being able to add, configurability into the application so that it was very flexible and it could serve all sorts of different types of customers in different industries of different sizes and different geographies, different languages, stuff like that. So that additional revenue went a long way when we made that change back in 2013. Fast forward another couple of years, we added a few tiers, right? So we have a starter tier, a closer tier, a rainmaker tier. They have different levels, features, and functionality depending on what the customer is looking for.
I want to pause on that for just a moment because this is, I think, critically important for a lot of startup entrepreneurs. Something you just said, which is it wasn't until several years into selling the product that you had these tiers. I think a lot of companies early on, before they've sold the first one, they throw up the pricing page because they see what everyone else is doing and they think they should have a basic, best value, and premium or call for quote because that's what everyone else does. And it sounds to me like you just had one product at one price. You figured out how to really dial in the value proposition there before starting to worry about expanding out the product and the additional value you get for more or less value that you get for less. Was that like a conscious decision that you made, or it just sort of worked out that way?
In a lot of ways, it worked out that way. I mean, I think we basically just had a product, and I think it was helpful to us early on. And I still, in a lot of ways, have a preference for the simplicity of, when I go to a website and there's not as many choices. I've read the research, so I understand some of the psychology and some of the results you get when you have, kind of the classic 3 options and you bookend the low and the high end, and you're really driving people toward the middle of the road one. But by doing that, you end up netting more than if you had, one price of app. But I don't know. As a buyer of lots of apps, I often really appreciate when someone just says, hey, we sell peanut butter. There's only one option. We don't have low grade and high grade peanut. It's just peanut butter, and it's always high quality and it's always the same price. It's like, cool, I'm buying. So that was, I think that was really helpful to us early on. What ended up happening, and this happens, I think, to a lot of folks, regardless of industry, certainly in software, is we started adding so many things into the product, and we got feedback from customers. Sometimes it's like, well, we really don't need that. So can we get it for a little bit less? Or right. We really need this other thing and we'd be willing to pay more for it. So you kind of naturally start to think about, we can split into cohorts our various customers. And some of them are wanting to pay more for more features. And some of them really want a slimmed down version of the app and paying less than average. That's why we split it up. But I think it did help us just from the standpoint, it was just me and Ryan. So to the extent that we had created a bunch of tiers, that then from a license management standpoint, from a support standpoint, from a sales and marketing standpoint, means we always have to speak to 3 tiers. We got to support 3 tiers. Ryan has to engineer 3 tiers. And instead it was just, Cirrus Insight is Cirrus Insight. And keeping it as simple as we could early on was really beneficial to us in terms of being able to release features faster and being able to just keep conversations very simple. You were either buying it or you weren't. You weren't deciding between multiple options.
Yeah, and if there's that one feature that you really want, but it's going to require me to pay an extra $9 a month, I'm like, that kind of sucks. Like, I love the product and I don't need all the other stuff. I just want this one more feature. Then There's almost a sense of disappointment, even though I'm coming to you with a problem that I need solved and I'm willing to give you money. Now I feel like I'm not quite getting the same value out of it. What was the timeline from the point of launch and you had those first 1,000 beta users to the first 500 customers? You said 500 customers were paying you $60 prepaid annually, so that's $30K in revenue. What was the timing
so I think,
there? Was that like 6 months or 12 months or?
It was thankfully a relatively short time. So I think we officially launched the application middle of December in 2011. I think we had signed those first 500 by April. So pretty quickly. And in fact, enough people came in, we didn't cap it at exactly 500. So we went above, so 550, 600 or so. And then we're like, okay, we've kept it open long enough. And so we closed that down. We had that kind of initial recurring revenue coming in. And then we, changed the pricing at that point to reflect the $9. So because we did want to keep the deadline at some point and not just continue it out infinitum. But yeah, that enabled us we had taken an early loan from friends and family just to be able to do some of the initial development. So Ryan was the core architect and engineer, but we needed some help on the front end, the UX side. And so we had paid some folks for that. We were able to pay back that loan around about March, April. And then from there, it was just the 2 of us free and clear, trying to hustle to add more customers and add more features.
And when did you decide to because this is another big question I get all the time, which is, when do I start bringing on a sales team of some kind, whether that, in today's vernacular, it's like maybe it's an SDR or BDR just to do lead development, or an AE that's managing bigger deals, or account manager, customer success people. For you, when did you feel like you hit the point where you could say, I need help? We
probably did it even later than when we needed help, but we did about 9 months in. So August of 2012. And it was the kind of the confluence of 3 things. One, we were keenly aware of the fact that we needed help, right? So sometimes Ryan would call and say, hey, how were sales today? And I would say, I have no idea, because I did support all day. And then the next day I would do sales and not do support, right? Because there wasn't time in the day to do all of that. So it was like, man, we really benefit from having someone focus on those things each day, every day. So we know we needed the help. We had enough customers at that point. I was like, there seems to be, something that happens around customer 1,000, give or take, depending on your business, where up until that point, you kind of know all the customers. I mean, I had talked with each one on the phone. We knew each other, first name basis. We emailed back and forth. And then once it gets beyond that, it just becomes, I think for most of us, just hard to keep track of everybody, right? I mean, beyond that number of customers, there's going to be more than one Mike and more than one Sally. And so it's like, okay, we need some help around here just to keep accounts straight. So that was part of it. Second factor was we were able to raise some angel money. So we had cash flow coming in from customers, but it's fair to say it was very rocky. So, one day, 1 week, 1 month, we'd be like, man, we hit a vein, right? This is awesome. We've got customers coming in. And then the next day, week, month, it was like, well, maybe that was all the customers. Like they're just barely trickling in now. We didn't change anything, but it's a little bit slow. So it just had to do with as customers found us. So having that investment helped us kind of smooth out the cash flow, if you will, gave us confidence to be able to hire folks and be able to tell them, hey, we're going to be able to meet payroll, not 2 out of 3 months, but 3 out of 3 months going forward, which we thought was important and we figured the employees would appreciate. And 3, that was on the eve of the first Dreamforce that we were going to go to as a company and have a booth and do a happy hour and try to have a presence there. And we were like, well, the 2 of us can go, but we can only meet so many people. We can only get so much done at the booth. And our voices are probably going to go after about a day and a half anyway. So then, how much success can we really have? And so it was in August that we hired 4 people, brought them all essentially at the same time, right before Dreamforce. And then we all went out to San Francisco and did that conference. And so it's fair to say we were just drinking from the fire hose at that point, right? Everyone was just getting up to speed, learning what the whole Salesforce ecosystem was all about, talking with as many customers as possible, working 20 hours each day and having a great time doing it. So that was the point at which we did it. If we had done it just based on, hey, when do we need help? We would have done it well before that. But it was important for us to have some money in the bank, and then it kind of pushed us over the edge, knowing that, hey, Dreamforce is coming. We want to go there and make as big a splash as a small company can. And so having the additional people there to go with us and have like a team where we could all show up in t-shirts and say, hey, we matter. We're over here. Come visit us. Come talk to us. We have a team. We can support you. Was important for us. So that was our timing. It was about 9 months in.
Yeah. So the Dreamforce being a forcing function because you needed coverage, and then also being able to generate revenue and raise a small amount of money to pay for that. Did you consciously hire 4 people because you felt like you needed coverage or at the event, or was it more about, like, if we're going to hire 1, we should hire more than 1?
Yeah, it was kind of looking at just functional needs. And so we said, well, we want and need someone really focused on sales. And so we hired our first salesperson. And hey, we're heading to Dreamforce, and Salesforce has such strength in go-to-market. We realized like marketing is super important. We need to be able to reach out to this huge potential customer base. And so we hired a VP of marketing. And then we're adding more and more customers. Like I say, we had surpassed 1,000 customers at that point. And so they have questions and they need help with implementation, or they've got questions about Salesforce. And so we hired a support person. And then we're like, well, the most important thing to be able to pay for everybody is on the sales side. So we hired a second salesperson. So we had 2 sales, and marketing, and a support. And interestingly, at that point, Ryan was still our sole engineer, right? Architect, engineer, product developer, UX, UI, everything that had to do with the product, Ryan was doing single-handedly. And obviously we were like, hey, we need more on the engineering side. The challenge there was, and this challenge is perhaps even more acute now, is simply being able to go and find talent. It's fair to say for anybody that's listening that's an engineer, that's awesome because you're in the field of the future today. For anybody that's studying, computer science, computer engineering, what a great field. In terms of job security, you're locked for life. There's no question in my mind that you're set, because there is unemployment's low anyway today. Unemployment is, 0 or below 0 if that were possible for folks with technical talent, because it's so in demand. So thankfully, it wasn't that long after we hired on kind of the operations business side of the house that we were able to go out and find some folks on the engineering side. And those came through personal relationships, folks that we knew, that Ryan knew in California. He's based in Irvine, that we were able to bring on board the team. And those early hires have been with us ever since, which has been awesome.
And so the engineering team is on the West Coast in LA, and then is it the sales and marketing folks are in Knoxville with you?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting split model, right? I mean, there's a natural division, if you will, between product and the folks that do the sales, marketing, and support in any company. But then we've also got this geographic division where we're, 2,000, 2,500 miles apart. And so there's some benefits to that, being able to focus. We have coverage across time zones. If a customer in Australia or Europe needs some support, we've got folks in 2 time zones here, so we can cover it. And then there's the obvious challenges of just, communication, right? How do you get information between the teams so that customer feedback through the support and sales apparatus get to engineers and vice versa? And so, for that, we've used various tools over time, namely email, then Google Hangouts we used for several years. Now, as many companies are, we're just wearing out Slack, right? Thousands of messages a day between the teams. Then we have video stand-ups through Zoom, et cetera. So that part's extremely important. But I would argue it's important whether you're in the same building or on separate coasts. But for us, it's especially important because we don't have as much face time.
And that's something I wanted to ask you about just more generally, not just the split team, but being in Knoxville, again, it's not what most people would consider a mecca for technology-based companies. How do you and I've done thinking about this myself in that, like, if you look at some other companies out there, there's like Basecamp in Chicago and there's ClickFunnels in Boise with Russell Brunson. And you kind of look at these types of companies that didn't take the traditional venture capital, Northern California to Silicon Valley approach. And it seems like it's entirely possible to build a really great technology company. But there's this hang up that some people have, like, oh, it's not Silicon Valley. I mean, I've worked with teams in Atlanta, it's got its own tech, cohort there and its own community there. And there's pressure from some of those teams to move to Silicon Valley. Like, how serious can you be if you're going to be based there? And I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think there's plenty of founders out there who may not want to build a billion-dollar business. They just want to have some element of happiness that doesn't include paying $6,000 for a studio apartment. Right.
And there's huge cost efficiencies from being willing or able to not be in these super high cost markets like, New York City, Silicon Valley, et cetera. So that's part of it. But nevertheless, look, Silicon Valley is a great place to have a company. There's so much energy and expertise and creativity in that area. It's no wonder there's so much innovation and entrepreneurship comes out of it. That said, to paraphrase Steve Case, founder of AOL, is on tour right now and around the country, and he calls it the rise of the rest tour. In other words, if you're not on the coast, right, where there's tons of available capital, lots of expertise, and a long history of developing these companies, what about Knoxville, and what about other cities in the middle of the country that are like us, kind of small, big cities, big, small cities, if you will? As it turns out, Knoxville has been a great place to have the company, I think, at a lot of levels. Certainly, yes, our costs are lower, no doubt. But we've been able to find, great talent here, and great talent's been able to find us. And so it's a great kind of matchmaking that happens when people are really excited to be able to come to work for kind of a exciting, fast growth, internet-based software as a service company. And we're really excited to find those people. And so that they haven't had to leave town right after they graduate and head off to Atlanta or Austin or some other, technology mecca, if you will. So they're really happy about that, and we're happy to keep them here. And there's just a ton of talent coming out of Maryville College, University of Tennessee, and just up above us is Oak Ridge National Lab. So one of the highest densities of PhDs in the country that are running the fastest supercomputer in the world. So there's a lot of technology happening in this area. It's just at a smaller scale than Silicon Valley or in Austin. And so it's frequently overlooked. But yeah, suffice to say, there's a ton of smart technologists out here, and there's an increasing number of software companies, which is fun to be part of.
Do you look at some of those other companies I mentioned, like whether it's Basecamp or MailChimp, never really took any big investment dollars? I mentioned ClickFunnels. Like, do you look around and is that a peer group for you, or do you try to emulate more of what a larger sort of traditional VC company, or do you just not look at that? I mean, you're so heads down in what you're doing every day, you just don't really care.
I would love to say they're a peer group, but I can't put myself in their level, right? So Basecamp and MailChimp are more like aspirational heroes, I think, for those of us that have started, small bootstrap companies. They've kind of taken it to the top level where, MailChimp is as big as, almost any software company that you can find out there. They just happen to have not raised a lot of money and they haven't gone public, but, brilliant company. We've had a chance to spend some time in their office down in Atlanta. try to read as much as I can of what they write. I read all the books that the Basecamp folks write. They're super insightful, and they're different than the playbooks that everybody else is using. So, early on in the life of the company, when we met with some, prospective investors, some of them would just say, "Hey, ooh, wait a second, you're based in Irvine in California. So that's Southern California. So that's outside of the 50-mile radius, surrounding the Hewlett-Packard garage. And so our bylaws don't enable us to invest there." To which Ryan and I would usually look at each other and be like, should we tell them we're also based in Knoxville, Tennessee? It's like probably a non-starter, right? But yeah, I think it's good to have, and I totally understand those funds. They want to have a personal relationship. They want to be able to go visit the office, if you will, down the street. And that's great. But yeah, there's also the Basecamps, the MailChimps, and hundreds of other companies throughout the country, around the world, right? There's plenty of super successful companies, throughout Europe and Southeast Asia, et cetera, that, are outside these technology meccas, but, they're smart people out hustling. So, I do think one advantage perhaps of being in a non-traditional market, for example, Knoxville, is we also don't have the risk of, talent going to the local Starbucks and getting poached.
Yeah.
Where that happens to my friends who run companies in San Francisco all the time, right? To the point where it's like everyone has their coffee shop inside the building now because they don't want people to leave. And it's like, it's a nice amenity, but one of the reasons the founders will tell you is they don't want the engineers to leave the building because then they're at risk, right? People are constantly, trading companies or vesting options and then leaving to go to a different company. And that's fine. You get a lot of great cross-pollination, but I think it makes it hard on founding teams and leaders to kind of keep the team together and take the company to the next level if it's just constant change.
I was thinking from a hiring standpoint, you almost have a bit of a monopoly on, what is our 50,000 students that go to the University of Tennessee? It's like, if you want to come work at a startup and you don't want to move to Silicon Valley or you don't want to move to Austin, we got a spot open. Like, you get pick up a litter.
Right. No, it's a great pipeline, right? And we can have those personal relationships with the folks that run the business school, run the entrepreneurship school, are meeting with the students. So we can say, hey, if you have a student that's, really excited about starting a new company or knows that they want to do it in the future and they want to have that experience of being part of that type of company now and, learn from us, see what we do wrong so that they can improve when they do it next time and see what we do right and kind of apply that to their next startup, then that's awesome. And so, yeah, we're the beneficiary of a ton of great referrals because they know we're here. They know we're hiring. So yeah, it's been a great pipeline with the local universities, as well as just with the community at large, right? We're sort of known in the community, even though we're still a relatively small company. It's one of those, sure, we're still a smaller fish, but the pond is smaller. Whereas if we were in the big pond, we would be one of hundreds or thousands of small companies where it's hard to stand out and raise your hand and say, hey, we're trying to attract talent when, Uber and Twitter and Google are also hiring. It's pretty hard to distinguish yourself. Yeah.
And I was, I looked on a bit of your background. I mean, you've been very active in the community in terms of, I saw you're on the board of directors for the Muse of Knoxville, which is a science, technology, engineering, arts, math museum. You do junior achievement. You're on the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center board as well. So, that probably is a way for you, I'm sure, to feel like you're giving back to the community. And it also helps you really promote the region and help people in that region understand like there's a future right here. It doesn't have to be out there.
Absolutely. And it's one of the most fun things that I get to do. Most of my work history in my life has been in nonprofits, whether it's been on boards or as a volunteer or as an employee. So this is really my first foray. Well, right out of college, I worked for a high-speed internet company, which was a great experience doing operations with them. And then now, back in kind of the for-profit software as a service industry, which has been awesome, but it's still fun to kind of go back to my roots and try to do community development. So one of the most fun things we did at the end of last year as a company, this is a company highlight, is that we partnered with the Knox County Schools, which is our education district here, one of the biggest in the country. So there's 60,000 students. So we partnered with them to set a Guinness World Record for the number of kids learning how to code. So we had almost 9,000 students simultaneously log in and follow an instructional video and then get creative and build their own programs using Scratch, which was the learning program built by MIT. And it was awesome, right? So I was a volunteer in one of the classrooms and was just kind of crossing my fingers, like, I hope it's working out across these other 50 or 60 classrooms around the county. And sure enough, it was. But it was just really neat. Some of the kids had coded before, And so they were like, hey, this is super fun. And others, never done it before, never thought of doing it before. Like, oh, so, they're all consumers. All the kids, even down to kindergarten, are like, oh, they've all seen YouTube. They've all been on Google. So they get it. But they're like, well, I didn't know I could create that. I didn't know I could make the computer do what I want it to do. And there's tremendous power in that. And so once they got coding, the lesson ended, but they kept going. They were super excited about, hey, how do I make the ball bounce higher? How do I make the room spin around? How do I change colors, add a background picture, et cetera? And so some of the stuff they built was really impressive. So yeah, the company being a vehicle that enables me and everybody in Cirrus Insight to do stuff like that has been really gratifying, because it's just a lot of fun to get out there in the community and do stuff.
Were you more nervous about the 9,000 kids or your first release of the software?
I think I was more nervous about the first release. I remember when Ryan and I went to visit some of our initial customers. We were on a trip, so we were in Palo Alto, and we parked the car and walked in. And as we walked in, the open floor plan, a lot of stand-up desks, so people are working. And I looked and I saw people obviously with Gmail open. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that's our app, right? In the side panel in Gmail, like they've got it loaded, they're using it. And, on the one hand, I was like, that's super awesome. But mostly it just freaked me out, because we, at that point, it was like a few months into the life of the company. So we knew too much, right? We knew that was like, oh, don't click down there. That still needs to be fixed. We're like, that's still under development. So it made us nervous, but then the people had great things to say about, oh yeah, we use this all the time. Saved me a bunch of time last week, or I was able to close a deal faster. So it was like, oh, awesome. And we got a lot of, creative and helpful feedback for next features. But yeah, my initial reaction when I saw it was like, I knew they were using it because I knew they paid for it. They're a customer. I trained them. But to see it live, yeah, it was actually kind of scary.
Yeah, I felt that way with, like you, I've written a couple books, and I've had people at workshops or people that don't even know, like, oh, I got a copy of your book and it's really helpful. And it's just like kind of really weird to know that I, hit publish and somehow, some way it got to that person's hands, and they
right.
read it. They actually implemented. I'm like, sometimes I'll joke with my wife. I'm like, can you believe they actually listen to me sometimes?
Right.
Like, I can't believe it. And it's just sort of a natural, I think we all have this sort of natural imposter syndrome sometimes. And I have to remind myself, like, no, there's a real value there. I know what I'm doing. And if at the end of the day, all we do is implement some idea, whether it works or not, at least they're implementing something and they're trying to learn and try to improve. So there's, I sort of have that as a fallback, if anything.
Absolutely. So. No, it is. It's an amazing and weird feeling to put something out in the world and then have people come back to you and say, I saw what you put out in the world and I decided to try it. It's like, whoa. So they took a risk on you and on us. Right. And then they've said, I'm happy with the risk I took. Yeah, that's pretty powerful, because they could have skipped it. They could have been like, no, I don't think I better try this, or it's not good enough, or et cetera. And they said, no, this sounds right. This looks valuable. And, trusting all the peers that I see that are using this. And so I'm going to take the leap. And when they do, and it works, and then they tell you, hey, the thing that you did is super awesome. That's really great feedback. I think that's the stuff that certainly keeps us going, as far as, well, what makes you want to keep building the app and expanding the platform and serving more customers? It's that feedback. Naturally, yeah, the company makes money, so it's got cash flow and so forth, but the life of the company is in the feedback that the team receives, right? Each success manager, each salesperson, each support person has to, I think, receive a certain amount of that feedback to feel like, oh yeah, this is exciting. I want to come back tomorrow and do this again, because we have goals, we're building something, and people appreciate it.
Yeah, that's one thing I always suggest to founders when they're onboarding a new, even whether it's a salesperson or a customer success person, whatever. It's like, just have them spend the first week talking to current customers. Like, hey, why do you use it? What do you like about it? What makes you excited? And just getting the customers to tell the new salesperson all the reasons why they're using it is, one, obviously it gives them selling points, but two, it gives that salesperson some confidence. Like, wow, okay, I must have made a good decision here to come join this company, because all these customers seem to really love this product. And I think that's something as salespeople in general, it's a good practice if you're getting kind of beaten up out there for a little while, just, maybe spend a day talking to some of your customers and checking in and saying hello. I had a sales manager, I used to sell textbooks, and he said, if you're ever feeling beaten up, go over and talk to, there was a certain segment of books in the technology sector that we did really, really well in. And he's like, just go spend a day in that department, because everybody's using our books and they're going to tell you how much they love them. And it'll just get you away, like help you shift your mindset back into a more positive.
Nice.
So
go over there. They're always winning over there. Go ahead.
Yeah, like they love our stuff over there. So if you're getting beaten up in the chemistry department, go over to electronics technology because they love us. Bring them donuts and they will love you even more. So that was like always my fail safe if I was getting beat up too much in other parts of it.
It has been for us a great way to learn because I've spent just days at a time and we've hired consultants, et cetera, trying to think up stuff like, marketing taglines. How do we present our value proposition? No matter how hard we try, and we've got some amazingly talented and smart people, the customer always has said it better than we have. Right. So we'll come up with something and put it on a bunch of business cards, et cetera. And then a customer will write a 1-line review that just encapsulates everything about the app that we wanted to convey, right? Where they found value and they said it in their own words. And so it's authentic and it's always better. So yeah, whether you're in sales or on the marketing side, on the go-to-market, the customer almost always has the better language for describing what it is that like we think we're doing one thing, but yeah, when you interview the customer, it turns out they bought it for a slightly different reason. They had reasons all their own, which should be unsurprising. But sometimes I think, we think they bought for the top 3 features that we listed on the website. And it turns out they bought for feature 4, 5, and 6 that we didn't think were that important, but they were everything to this one customer. So yeah, that's often been really important and really interesting for us because it gives us the talking points for the next sale.
Cool. Well, listen, you've been super, super generous with your time. I really appreciate you sharing the story a little bit and lots of really tactical stuff when it came to launching and pricing and ramping up your Salesforce and everything when it comes to getting to where you are now with Cirrus. So Brandon, I wanted to ask like 2 last questions. One is, if there's one piece of advice that you would tell somebody listening, whether it's at the earliest stage or they're just launching, just starting to ramp up sales, or starting to hire, like what's one lesson or what's one piece of advice you'd like to give them that you find has been either your biggest mistake or your biggest win? What do you share with people that are going through what you've been able to get through over the last 6 years?
I guess I'll give the classic lawyer 2-part answer. Number one is, always comes to mind is stay curious. I think curiosity as a concept is kind of an antidote to burnout and also being overwhelmed, being scared. It's like, if you're just curious, hey, I want to find out what happens next. I wonder what we can do. I wonder how this is going to play out. Then that's kind of a key attribute that I certainly try to maintain and that we always look for when we're doing hiring. Like, is the person curious? Are they asking us questions? Do they want to know how the whole industry works? Do they try the app on their own, or do we have to ask them to try it? Like, if they're just a curious person, that's going to go a long way. I think the other thing that I would say is, and this was a result of being in a room with a lot of other entrepreneurs and a bunch of investors and private equity folks, and they were trying to come up with a list of what are the most important traits of entrepreneurs. And so naturally on the list, stuff like energy and willingness to take risks and so forth. But what netted out at the number 1 slot was ability to make a decision. And I was like, that's a really interesting thing that got to the top of the list. And the reason people gave was the decisions don't have to be right every time. Like, hopefully they're more right than wrong. But if you stall out, right, if you just can't make a decision, if you're paralyzed, then that's what can really harm businesses. But if you get in a cycle of being able to, like, okay, I've got my information, I'm going to make a decision, and then be able to live with that, even if it goes wrong. And goodness knows we've made hundreds of wrong decisions, but we've also made some right ones. And I don't think we ever would have made the right ones if we hadn't been willing to just be like, okay, we're going to launch. Okay, we're going to release, even though we haven't fully tested this time, right? Or we're going to try to sell this customer, even though we've never sold in that market segment before. Being willing to do that, make those decisions, has been super important.
I love that. I love both of those. Stay curious and be willing to make a decision. So then my last question is there any, how can people get a hold of you? And is there any causes or any place that you'd like to people check out, direct their attention? I'm assuming you're going to be at Dreamforce this year. How can people get a hold of you, and where would you like people to go, whether it's about your company or other causes that you support? Yeah,
certainly. It's always, we have a very accessible team. So you can reach us on our website, cirrusinsight.com. We've got a whole contingent going out for Dreamforce. We've got a VIP harbor cruise for some of our top customers and partners. It's always a lot of fun. And then we'll be holed up having meetings and demos and a WeWork. And of course, we'll be at the expo and go into a bunch of sessions at Dreamforce. So if you're out in San Francisco at Dreamforce, we'd love to meet up with you there. Otherwise, we have a company lunch every Friday in Knoxville. So if folks are traveling around and want to swing out to the office and see how we do it here in the Southeast, we'd love to have folks. And since, Scott, I know you're an ultra runner, if you ever come out here to run the Appalachian Trail, there's got to be one of those trails that's on your list, and let us know, because the trail comes right through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which a little plug for that. The most visited national park in the country. A lot of people don't know that. They assume it's Yosemite or Yellowstone, but it's actually the Smokies. We're located very close to that. So the outdoor scene here, in terms of hiking, running, cycling, paddling, all that good stuff, is pretty huge out here in Knoxville. And if you're in town, you mentioned the Muse earlier, which is our children's museum here in Knoxville. So if you've got a family with little kids like I do, the Muse is an awesome place to visit.
That's cool. I'll make sure to add that all to the show notes. There's 2 races in Tennessee that I want to do. One is the Barkley Marathons.
Oh yeah, that one's super famous. And for people that are listening, there's a movie on Netflix about the Barkley Marathons, and I highly recommend it to anybody. It's super entertaining, and it demonstrates at some level the insanity of the whole thing. Like, it's that hard. There's only a few people, right? Like maybe a dozen, a couple dozen,
14,
have ever finished.
14 people out of thousands have ever finished it.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
So that's why I want to do it. I want to step into the dragon's mouth and see what I can do. And the other one, it's run by the same race organizer. It's called the Vol State 500. It's a 500K race, 314 miles. He likes to call it as 100 pi. It's because it's 314 miles. So that's like a 6-day, 7-day race that happens every year. And I want to give that one a shot. So I might be out in Tennessee sooner than you. Now I've got public accountability too.
Exactly right. Yeah, you've done the classic thing. You tell a friend you're going to do something, and then it's like, well, no, you got to go do it. I've bicycled a long way. Running is a whole nother ball game. I think I've done 50K. I think is the longest I've done. So maybe I ramp up and do a 50 miler at some point. But if you come out here to do those, you'll have a contingent of software folks cheering you on, because those would be pretty incredible achievements.
That's good. I'll need that support. Sometimes my wife is telling friends about what I do, and they're like, wait a minute, was that a bike race or a running race? She's like, no, it was a 100-mile running race.
Right.
Self-powered. Self-powered. Yeah. Well, cool. So glad that we're able to make this work, Brandon. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Everyone, definitely check out the website, check out the company. So much more we could have talked about. I've got tons of questions we didn't get to, so maybe we can do a part 2 sometime in the future. And I'll be at Dreamforce, so I'll come by and say hi.
Super. Sounds like a plan. Thanks for having me, Scott.
All right, man. Good job. Talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Bye. All right, everyone. That is my conversation with Brandon Bruce, COO and co-founder of Cirrus Insight. For me, as I'm looking through my notes here on my desk, a couple key insights for me with a conversation with Brandon is, number one, how quickly they were able to start monetizing their app. And I think that was really just a decision by them to say, okay, we built this product. It's been out there in the wild for a couple of months. We've got about 1,000 users in our target market. And I think we've got enough here to start charging. And so they use some leverage there in terms of offering some promotional pricing and rewarding early adopters. And that helped them to, one, prove out that there's real value in the product that they built because people are willing to pay them. And secondly, I think most importantly, is it helped them fund their company from a very, very early stage. The initial work that they did was through a family loan. And so they were able to pay off that loan and then start generating revenue, which allowed them to then start reinvesting that into the company, and then also prove out a little bit of a business model to raise some early angel funding. 9 months later, after first starting the company, then they're hiring their first sales team, which is the second big insight here, is that when they hired that sales team, they had a couple of forcing functions. One was on their time. Brandon said he was spending a lot of time on customer support one day and then a lot of time selling on the other day, but he couldn't do both. So obviously there was enough work to go around to hire some people. Secondly, they had the forcing function of Dreamforce. They had paid for a booth and they needed coverage, and they wanted to make sure that they were leveraging that opportunity. And so having found a way to start charging customers and generate revenue, that gave them the capital that they needed, along with some of the angel funding, to then hire and start scaling out the team. So that was the second big lesson for me. The third is that we didn't dive into it as much in the conversation, but something that I want to pull out of there that I really call your attention to was their use of partners early in their sales process. Because they were working with Gmail and with Salesforce, they were able to tap into the Salesforce consultant ecosystem and use that as a mechanism for their go-to-market strategy. Instead of them personally going out to the marketplace, which they did, they also had the ability of using these Salesforce consultants in a one-to-many reach. And so whether that was conscious or unconscious, deliberate or not, using that as a mechanism to reach their target market added a lot of credibility to their end consumer because they were able to very, very quickly access those customers in ways that they may not have been able to. But two, of course, now they're able to reach more of the market than they would have been able to on their own. So that was the third big insight for me. The last thing that I wanted to call the attention to is just their approach to building their company. I think a lot of us, especially if you're in Silicon Valley or Austin or New York or any place where there's a huge concentration of startups, we kind of it's easy to get lost in the world and feel the pressure, the peer pressure or the social pressure around, I've got to build this startup to be, a unicorn or a $10 billion company or all these other things that we see going on around us. And I think oftentimes we forget that we have permission as company founders to run the company and build the company that we want to have. And that doesn't always mean to build a $1 billion company. It doesn't always mean to have a company with 10,000 employees in the next 5 years. I think there's plenty of opportunity to balance the desire to solve a problem and be an entrepreneur with making sure that you juxtapose that with a healthy personal happiness. And Brandon, I think, and his team is a really great example of saying, look, we like Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a great place to live. It's inexpensive. This is where we want to be, and not succumbing to the pressure of picking up the team and moving to Silicon Valley and going the traditional venture capital route, because that traditional route is actually not so traditional, because most companies out there are built on bootstrapping, small loans from friends and family, and other forms of financing. So just because you're a technology company doesn't mean that you have to follow the venture capital route. There's plenty of other ways that you can build and bootstrap your business. So those are some of the big takeaways for me. Really enjoyed the conversation with Brandon. We'll definitely check him out, check his team out at Dreamforce. So if you're listening to this, I think you should as well. I've checked out the app. I've used Assistant.to, which I mentioned as one of their sister products. It's a huge productivity tool for setting meetings. So that in itself has been a big win for me. And I know many others who are using Salesforce and Gmail have found a huge amount of productivity and value out of their main product. So definitely go check it out. All right. So I think that's the end of the podcast. One last thing I would ask, if you've listened this far, means you're probably digging the content. And if you're digging the content, please leave a review and please tell 10 friends about the podcast, because nothing jazzes us more than logging in and seeing increases in subscribers, increases in episode downloads. Big motivator for us to keep bringing people like Brandon onto the podcast that deliver a huge amount of value and hopefully some lessons learned that you can apply to your business. So please do leave a review and please do tell 10 friends. Okay. So that's it for now. Scott Sambucci signing off.